In April 2016, a Kickstarter for a new adventure game was launched by a small Romanian indie studio stuck in attic from Transylvania. The game was called Gibbous, a Cthulhu Adventure. A traditional point-and-click adventure game with LucasArts-inspired cartoony 2D graphics and animation, whimsical and witty humor. In addition, it's a Lovecraftian game inspired by the famous American horror writer H.P. Lovecraft and his stories. The developers in the Kickstarter pitch explained that they wanted to basically combine all those elements and make a LucasArts-like family-friendly Lovecraftian point-and-click adventure game, while at the same time respecting Cthulhu mythos and the cosmic horror in general, and take them seriously enough without turning, say, Cthulhu for instance, or any other gods into a joke for laughs. As a fan of old LucasArts adventure games and the genre in general, Lovecraft and Cthulhu mythos, I naturally got excited, and after being convinced by the Kickstarter pitch and the demo they provided, I pledged immediately about €80, $90 US. So that's another reason why I really wanted this game to be very good, so keep that in mind while watching this video. With over 1900 backers, the game was funded, and after over 3 years since the crowdfunding campaign, the game was finally released on August 7th, 2019. One of my most anticipated games of the year. So was it worth the wait? Did the game meet my admittedly high expectations? Did Stuck in Attic succeed in their goal of making a comedic, family-friendly, Lovecraftian adventure that still took cosmic horror seriously? My name is Siperos, and these are my thoughts on
Gibbous, a Cthulhu Adventure.
When you boot up the game for the first time, you see a cutscene where a bunch of cultists have gathered before their cult leader, who tells his followers that they may have come upon the location of the one and only Necronomicon, the same grimoire from Cthulhu mythos. The cultists are watching and telling on a private investigator, Don Getaip, one of the game's 2 protagonists, who was hired by a mysterious client to find the book and, without him knowing, is leading the cultists right to it. Once he enters the dark and old library of Darkham, totally not a reference to the fictional city of Arkham from the stories, the cultists deliver their bomb that goes off, and they kidnap Getaip right in front of our second protagonist, Buzz Kerwan, a half-Romanian librarian. Buzz soon finds the actual Necronomicon before the cultists, takes it home with him, and, foolishly, reads its pages out loud, accidentally making his cat Kitty talk. She, however, is not happy about the situation at all, and so the two are off to their quest to find a way to return Kitty back to cathood. And while they are at it, they, along with Getaip, also try to learn what the heck is going on and what is their role in this whole mess with the Necronomicon, the cultists, and strange powerful forces that seem to guide them. Before we go to the characters, I must talk about the first thing that catches anyone's eye when they see a new game. The graphics and art style. Gibbous looks gorgeous. Absolutely beautiful and detailed hand-painted environments with great colors, as well as smoothly animated 2D cartoon characters and cutscenes. This art style is my jam. This is the kind of high quality I would expect from LucasArts if they were still making adventure games today. That is perhaps the highest praise that I can give to any adventure game or developer. If Gibbous won't get any awards, or at least be nominated for the best art style, visuals or animation or anything in this year's Aggie Game Awards of 2019, I'm gonna throw a fit. Now to the characters. The game has 2, or let's say 3 protagonists, starting with Getaip, Don Archetype. Yes, that's a pun name, voiced by Don Thacker. Getaip is my favorite character in the game, being, well, the archetype of your typical private investigator. He is moody, a bit of a nihilist, does a lot of self-monologue.
You know something's left to center when the folks hiring you want to keep themselves all secret-like. Cash is cash, though, and I could really use the milk. That something doesn't change.
Giving the game a more noir tone whenever you play him. He takes everything seriously, sometimes too seriously, which also makes him a funny character. I also like how he lives in the past, not understanding how stuff like the internet works, and even keeps physical criminal files in a cabinet still instead of using a computer. He's old school like that. And ever since his encounter with the cultists, he apparently became unable to wear shoes ever again.
We had our differences, that shoe and I. Haven't spoken since the separation.
As a playable character, Getaip is different from Buzz in a couple of ways. As an investigator, he likes to write down notes about things he needs to do and sometimes shares his own ideas what he should try, so the game is giving subtle hints that way. And early on in the game, Getaip gets a Haunter's Mark, which is an ability he can use to read objects and people's past, occasionally giving you helpful, sometimes essential knowledge that you need to solve some puzzles. As far as puzzle design goes, this is the coolest mechanic in the game, but more about that later. Then Buzz Kerwin, our second protagonist, voiced by one of the developers, Liviu Boar.
Well, I never thought I'd actually say this, but the Necronomicon feels weird in my pants.
Buzz is honestly a rather boring character at the end of the day, at least compared to K-Type and his cat Kitty. A librarian and a student from the 21st century that is easy to relate to, so he got that going for him. That's not a bad thing. I actually think that he fits well in the game. I once pondered would the game have been better if it had just K-Type and Kitty in it, and I think no. Those two have next to no chemistry, and Buzz kinda balances things out being the normal guy of the group. Sure, he is likable, he has his moments and even a funny line here and there, but he is just an ordinary guy carrying the Necronomicon around, being overshadowed by the two more interesting / fun protagonists. I like to think that Buzz is in the game to reflect us, the players, and our reactions to the game's events. To sum it up, you're not going to remember Gibbous because of Buzz, but you are going to remember Buzz because he was in Gibbous. Then lastly, but definitely not least, Kitty, voiced by Lindsay Peck.
No, I'm gonna walk the earth like Cain in Kung Fu. You'll stick around and undo this. You really think I want to be like you for the rest of my life?
Although she is technically more like a sidekick than a playable protagonist, since you don't control her like you control Buzz and K-Type, except for this one short part in Chapter 5, I still like to think of her as the third protagonist. Kitty is, well, a talking cat. What else do you need? She is like what most would expect a stereotypical cat to be like. Selfish, only caring about her own predicament, doesn't want to cooperate unless she must in order to solve puzzles, and is a sarcastic smartass. Besides being essential to solve a number of puzzles in the game with Buzz, she can also give some ideas how to proceed if you ask her what they should do next. I, and apparently everyone else I have seen playing the game, like Kitty a lot, but unfortunately I feel there is not as much interaction with her or stuff for her to do as I had hoped. But in the few scenes and conversations where she is in, she is fun, and we even get to see her grow as a character as the story goes on. The rest of the cast is great. Lots of memorable characters, especially all the residents of Fishmouth from the tourist info point clerk
Nice is not a notion commonly associated with Fishmouth.
to the suspicious innkeeper with a taste for a particular type of meat.
Yeah, and I've been known to judge a man. He was nosy and skinny. Too skinny.
And the town drunk, Zadok. Yes, the same Zadok from the Shadow over Innsmouth.
The esoteric order of Dagon. Fishmouth folks worshipping the deep ones. Dagon's their high priest. Supposed to be this huge amphibian thing.
I guess he got tired of the fishing town occupied by cultists worshipping the deep ones and moved to another fishing town occupied by cultists worshipping the same deep ones. The voice acting of all these characters is also very good and memorable.
I am a protector of the other, a seeker of truth, and a hunter of evils.
There was at least one performance though that didn't quite sound like the rest, as if the lines were not even recorded in a proper studio. And there was one character who spoke very slowly and as if the actor was reading his lines from paper. But those were only a couple exceptions in an otherwise very good cast. The story is, in my opinion, the best thing about Gibbous. I won't talk about it much in order to avoid giving away too much, but I think the overall story is very Lovecraftian and handled very well, although it may be a little hard to follow to some. There is a lot of references from Lovecraft's works, some subtle and some not so subtle. The story even borrows many things like characters or just names and locations from Lovecraft's stories, such as Call of Cthulhu, of course, The Shadow over Innsmouth, The Thing on the Doorstep, and The Haunter of the Dark. Speaking about references, there's many from other adventure games too, of course, of both characters and even developers. This guy, for example, looks like Tim Schafer. Although you could argue that the prologue and chapter 1 are packed with too many references, and I am inclined to agree. The rest of the game doesn't thankfully have as many, but the game seems to be just packed with them at the start. I like to find the references to other games, but I would appreciate them more if they were more scarce and cleverly placed. The best location in the game to me is the town of Fishmouth, which is basically this game's Innsmouth with its unfriendly, creepy and not entirely human residents. You could say they are a little fishy. sorry. I think the way they portrayed Fishmet was perfect. The atmosphere is just right, dark, eerie and uneasy. One of the best moments in the game was the part where Zadok tells you about Fishmet and its dark secret. That made me feel unease. The game is not scary by any means, but it handles the cosmic horror Lovecraft is known for very well. And since the developers are Romanians, the game does take us to Transylvania as well, and we get a small peek at Romanian culture, which is a nice touch. The humor is kinda hit and miss for me. Some jokes worked and I found K-Type the funniest overall, and some just didn't work for me. But regardless, I think the developers managed to balance the humor and horror elements without one taking over the other. I think the best joke in the game is Fishmet's tourist info point. The fact that Fishmet, which again is basically Innsmouth, has a tourist info point is funny enough already in itself. But what makes it even funnier is the fact that the clerk, instead of telling what is so great about the town, is trying to encourage our protagonist to leave immediately and never look back. As for the ending, at first I was like, wait, that's how it ends? But the longer I thought about it, the more I liked it. It's bittersweet in a way. If you want a happy ending that gives satisfying conclusions and answers to everything, I'm afraid you are going to be disappointed. But it is about as perfect Lovecraftian ending as it can get in a game like this. If you know at least some of Lovecraft's stories, you know they don't tend to end happily. The protagonists tend to either fall into madness or just die. Gibbous' ending is not as dark or gloomy by any means, but it's not your typical happy ending either. It's also rather open as well, kinda leaving you hanging, wondering what happened next. It's not nearly as bad as, say, Toonstruck's or A Vampire Story's endings that were dependent on sequels that never came out. But it's open enough to make room for a sequel if Stuck in Attic ever decides to do it. Overall, I'm happy with the ending and very happy with the story as a whole. And now we come to the puzzle design. It's okay. But that's also the most disappointing thing about Gibbous. The puzzles are just okay. None of them are terrible, badly designed or illogical. The biggest leap in logic in my opinion was the part where you had to shoot at a heavy hanging tube with a handgun to make it swing hard enough to break the glass above the locked door. I'm not an expert in laws of physics, but I'm quite sure a single gunshot from a handgun would not give enough force to do that. Anyway, my biggest gripe with the puzzle design is that it's very basic. You pick up items, sometimes combine them, and use them on the right thing or give them to the right person for a trade. There is nothing wrong with that simple design per se. That's the bread and butter of pretty much every adventure game after all. I just had higher hopes for Gibbous personally. Usually I could name at least a couple of favorite puzzles I found enjoyable, but not here. None of them really stood out to me because they were creative, innovative, or just fun to do. They are very easy too. There were only 2 puzzles that got me and everyone else whose Let's Plays I watched stuck for some time. The first one was about figuring out the right 5 words needed for this ritual pentagram on the floor, and the second one about deciphering the letters of an alien-looking alphabet and using that knowledge to open some doors. The most disappointing thing was the fact that we didn't use the Necronomicon for anything until the very last chapter, despite carrying it around through the entire game. Now, I understand that reading from it out loud, especially when you don't know what you are reading exactly, is a terrible idea. That's why Kitty started to talk and everything, although I think we can all agree that was awesome. But at the same time, I think it was a missed opportunity to not use something like the Necronomicon, its spells or whatever to overcome some obstacles, at the price of a little bit of sanity, turning Buzz slightly crazier over time. But at least K-Type had Haunter's Mark to read the past of items and objects. That was the coolest thing in the game as far as game mechanics and puzzle design go. Another feature that I like in Gibbous is how you can inspect objects and whatever else you can look at or interact with multiple times, and the protagonist would say something different instead of repeating the same observation again and again. You can inspect an item, object, person or a scenery about 3 times on average, sometimes 2, occasionally more. The new information is not always useful, but it is a nice touch and not something many adventure games do. I also like how the inspect icon is an eye that is open when you can inspect something again for more information, and once you have learned everything, the eye is half closed. It's a small thing, but much appreciated. So did Stuck in Attic succeed in their goal they set for themselves with Gibbous, a Cthulhu Adventure? Yes, absolutely. I think they did a wonderful job in making LucasArts a family-friendly adventure game based on Cthulhu mythos, while at the same time taking cosmic horror seriously enough and tell a good and original Lovecraftian story. The characters are memorable with good voice acting, the 2D animation is smooth and well done, the art style is beautiful and colorful, Humor, while hit and miss for me, is well balanced with the cosmic horror theme. The ending, while admittedly may not satisfy everyone and leaves you hanging, I think is bittersweet but very Lovecraftian at least. If you are looking for an adventure game with challenging or creative puzzles, Gibbous is not the right game for you. You pick up this game for the story and if you are a Lovecraft fan. If you are put off by the cartoon graphics and more light-hearted tone, preferring more serious and mature Lovecraftian games like Chronicle of Innsmouth, the upcoming Chronicle of Innsmouth, Mountains of Madness, or Cyanide Studios' Call of Cthulhu, which I have yet to play myself, or the just recently released Stygian, Reign of the Old Ones, I can understand that. But at the same time, I think you are doing yourself a disservice not checking out Gibbous. But you know what is the most amazing thing about Gibbous, in my opinion? Its developers at Stuck in Attic. This game was done by a very small team of 3 people, and I apologize in advance if I'm mispronouncing their names. Liviu Boar, the game designer, director, writer, as well as one of the animators, artists and composers, the voice of Buzz, and a handful of other characters. Cami Cuibus, the second animator, artist and composer, and Niku Campion, the programmer. The fact that Gibbous came out as good as it did is a small miracle to me. Not because I had any doubts about the team's talents, but because they are such a small team. Making video games is very hard, and this was their first real game project with a limited budget and without a publisher. 100 things could have easily gone wrong, and yet they triumphed and delivered a great Lovecraftian adventure. I am very happy that I backed this project. If Stuck in Attic decides to crowdfund another point-and-click adventure game, whether it's a sequel to Gibbous or another Lovecraftian story of its own or something else entirely, I am more than happy to back them again. If you want to learn more about the trio and the game's development, challenges and whatnot, you can check out their Stuck in Attic, making an indie game documentary on YouTube. The link can be found down below in the description. And there you go, folks. Those were my thoughts on Gibbous, a Cthulhu Adventure. What are your thoughts on the game? Let me know in the comments and thanks for watching.